It's 218 BC, and a young Carthaginian general stares up at the towering peaks of the Alps. Behind him march 90,000 men, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. The Romans think the mountains will stop him, that no army could possibly cross those frozen peaks alive. They're about to learn they're dead wrong. This is Hannibal Barca, and he's about to pull off one of the most impossible military maneuvers in human history. But the cost will be devastating, and it will change the course of two civilizations forever. This is the unbelievable story of how one man's obsession with revenge led him to march elephants over mountains and bring Rome to its knees. Hannibal Barca wasn't born to be Rome's greatest nightmare. He was forged into one. His father, Hannibal Barca, was a Carthaginian general who had fought Rome in the First Punic War and lost everything. Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, all stripped away by Roman greed. When Hannibal was just 9 years old, his father made him swear an oath at the altar of their gods, "I will never be a friend to Rome." It was a promise that would define his entire life. Hamilcar died when Hannibal was young, but that burning hatred of Rome, that lived on. By 221 BC, Hannibal had become the commander of Carthaginian forces in Spain. He was brilliant, charismatic, and utterly ruthless. His soldiers would follow him anywhere, which was lucky because he was about to ask them to do the impossible. Rome controlled the Mediterranean Sea. Any direct attack by ship would be suicide. But Hannibal had a different idea, one so crazy it just might work. He would march his entire army overland, across the Pyrenees, through Gaul, and over the Alps themselves. The Romans laughed when their spies brought word of Hannibal's plan. March elephants over mountains? In winter? It was madness. They were so confident that they sent most of their armies to Spain and Africa, leaving Italy practically defenseless. They had no idea what was coming for them. In the spring of 218 BC, Hannibal's massive army began its march. 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 African war elephants that would become the stuff of legend. The sight must have been incredible, a river of bronze and leather stretching for miles. But Hannibal's problems started immediately. Crossing the Pyrenees cost him 11,000 men to local tribes who attacked his supply lines. By the time he reached the Rhone River in southern Gaul, he'd already lost more than 10% of his force. The Rhone crossing was a nightmare. The river was wide, fast, and the local Gallic tribes were hostile. Getting 90,000 men across was hard enough, but those elephants? That seemed impossible. Hannibal's solution was typically brilliant. His engineers built massive rafts covered in dirt and vegetation. The elephants, thinking they were walking on solid ground, stepped aboard. Only when they were halfway across did they realize they were floating, and by then, it was too late to turn back. The Romans still weren't worried. Let him come, they thought. He'll never make it over the Alps, and even if he does, what's left of his army won't be worth fighting. They were about to learn that they had drastically underestimated their enemy. The Alpine crossing began in October 218 BC. Hannibal chose the worst possible time. Winter was coming, and the Alpine passes were already thick with snow. His guides were local Gallic chiefs who had their own reasons for wanting to see Rome humbled. For 15 days, Hannibal's army climbed higher and higher into the frozen peaks. The air grew thin. Men collapsed from exhaustion. Horses lost their footing on icy paths and plummeted thousands of feet to their deaths. The elephants suffered terribly. These massive African beasts had never seen snow, never felt cold like this. One by one, they began to die. The sight of a war elephant collapsing in the snow, its breath steaming in the frigid air, must have been heartbreaking. But the worst was yet to come. On the 9th day of the crossing, the army reached a massive rockfall that blocked their path completely. Thousands of tons of stone and ice stretched across the narrow mountain pass. Any other general would have turned back. Hannibal ordered his men to clear it. For 4 days, they hacked at the rocks with picks and hammers. When that didn't work, they built massive fires to heat the stone, then poured vinegar on it to make it crack and crumble. It was back-breaking, desperate work at 8,000 feet above sea level. Men's hands froze to their tools. The lucky ones collapsed from exhaustion. The unlucky ones simply froze to death where they stood. But it worked. On the 13th day, they broke through. The descent was even worse than the climb. The path was so steep and icy that men and animals couldn't keep their footing. Soldiers tied ropes around each other and moved in long human chains. When horses fell, they took their riders with them. On the 15th day, Hannibal's army finally stumbled out of the Alps and into the Po River valley of northern Italy. They had done the impossible. They had crossed the mountains. But the cost was devastating. Of the 90,000 men who had started the journey, only 26,000 remained. The cavalry was reduced to 6,000. Of the 37 magnificent war elephants, only one survived the crossing, a massive bull named Surus, meaning the Syrian. Hannibal had lost 2/3 of his army to get here, but he was in Italy, and Rome had no idea he was coming. The first Roman army sent to stop him was commanded by Publius Cornelius Scipio, the same general whose forces Hannibal had outmaneuvered at the Rhone. Scipio was confident that whatever remained of Hannibal's army would be easy prey. At the Battle of Trebia in December 218 BC, Hannibal showed Rome exactly what they were dealing with. Despite being outnumbered, he used the terrain and weather to his advantage, luring the Romans into a trap. When the dust settled, 26,000 Roman soldiers lay dead in the snow. Hannibal had announced his arrival in Italy in the most dramatic way possible. For the next 15 years, Hannibal would rampage through Italy, winning victory after victory and bringing Rome closer to collapse than it had ever been. At Cannae in 216 BC, he would destroy the largest army Rome had ever assembled, killing 50,000 men in a single afternoon. But it all started with that impossible march over the Alps. Hannibal had proven that Rome wasn't invincible, that their enemies could reach them anywhere, even in the heart of Italy itself. The crossing cost him dearly. He would never again command an army as large as the one he led into the mountains. But those 15 days in the Alps had transformed him from a regional threat into Rome's greatest nightmare. The Romans would never forget the lesson. For centuries afterwards, Roman mothers would frighten their children with the words, "Hannibal ad portas," Hannibal is at the gates. Because sometimes the most impossible journeys are the ones that change history forever.